Okay, I started this hour talking about lesson 5.2 absolute value, and I asked students to solve this, and most people got the answers, and then I just told them that they're probably wrong. And let me show you where the common mistake is. And you just follow along and see if you did the same thing as I did. 0 equals, okay, the 4 and the -1 can go together, and they would make 3. Okay, so then I'm going to go, and I know some of you may have done it differently, but you'll catch up to me in a moment when you'll get to the same spot. Because some of you probably added 1 to both sides and then subtracted 4 from both sides, but that's in the end going to be just like this when I subtract 3 from both sides. And you would have had -3 equals 3 absolute value of x minus 2. Can we all agree that at some point you got this? Yes? Okay, good. Now I divide by what? 3. And this is, by the way, the process of what I call get the clump alone. In math, if you have a clump like this, it could be any kind of grouping symbol. It could be a square root. It could be an absolute value. It could be oh, there's a lot of things it could be, but it's a clump. You want to get that clump alone. So I'm trying to get this green clump alone before I break it out of jail. Okay, it's inside that little, it's trapped in some kind of grouping symbol. Well, anyway, I'm dividing by 3, and then this cancels, and then I get -1 equals absolute value of x minus 2. And if you didn't just right there say, no solution, you screwed up. Do you get absolute values cannot come out to be negatives? But it's really easy to fall into the trap of going, I know how to solve these. I'm going to split it into 2 parts. And I'm going to say that x minus 2 is equal to -1. I'm going to say x minus 2 is equal to +1. And you just solve it from there, and you get the answers you think you're done. And almost everybody does that. Had you caught that? All right, good. So a couple of people did. All right. So I get you think that, oh, this is the process. Should I just do what you told me to do? Except I never showed you ones where the absolute value came out negative before. So now I get an answer of x equals 1, and I get an answer of x minus 2 equals 1, and I should just simply add 2 to both sides here. And I get x equals 3, and there's my 2 answers, which are totally wrong. How many of you, be honest, how many of you thought it was 1 and 3? Because I'm proud of you, actually, because you knew the process. See, a lot of people can't even get that far, because they don't know how to solve absolute values at all. Okay, but if you knew how to solve absolute values, you probably thought it was 1 and 3, unless you caught that little weird exception that, oh, I have an absolute value equaling a negative. But I want you to think about this. Couldn't you have caught your mistake at the end? How could you have known? Yes, by plugging it in. Could you get the door for me, please? Thank you. If I actually take those numbers and plug them into the equation, 1 and 3 are supposed to work. I go back to my original equation. Notice I'm not going partway to some partway done problem. I go to the very beginning, and I stick in a 1, and I see if it actually works. Is 1 minus 2 -1? Yeah, absolute value of that is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Then I subtract 1. 3 minus 1 makes 2. And 4 plus 2 apparently equals 0. See what I mean? When I actually solve this thing out, it is wrong. It is not coming out to a true statement. So, bottom line, you should check your answers. And frankly, that'll solve almost all the problems today. If you don't just do the process, you take a minute to check them. We've lost a few astronauts over time. Do you remember hearing about the Challenger? And that was up, going incredibly fast. And it was the heat. What they think happened was the heat got underneath a tile. Oh, not that. What was a different one? Thank you. You're right. What was that one called? Columbia? Okay. How do you know all of this? That's amazing. Okay. All right. So this is the point is when you're working on one of those space shuttles, people's lives depend on the things that you do. Like literally, if you mess up and you make your heat shield wrong, you design it wrong, somebody can die because of that. And there's other people's jobs that are like that. There's other people's, jobs that are, for instance, testing cars for safety. And if you want to fake the test to make your car look better, you all of a sudden have people thinking that they're in a 5-star super safe car, and it's not going to actually do what you said. They might end up dying because of what you do. So there are decisions you make that are life and death. Granted, in my class, nobody's going to die if you screw up. But you hopefully can learn to be careful. And this is one of those tests where you better double check things, because all it would have taken is for you to double check it. And you could have even missed it right here that it was a negative number, but caught it at the end when these numbers, when plugged in, didn't actually work. All right, good. Let's move on to other more complicated kinds. This is a good reminder that absolute value of, sorry, I actually would have written this backwards. The square root of x squared is the absolute value of x. That's really important concept to get. Otherwise, if you had this, do you get if you just square root both sides, you're going to say x equals 4 and think that's the right answer? And that's wrong because there's two answers. Okay, so what's supposed to happen right here? The absolute value. And then the absolute value is what leads you to have two answers. I know some of you still think that you just put a plus, pop a plus minus on this other number and you're fine. You're going to learn today, no, that's not what happens here. Otherwise, you're trying to say that the square root of 16 is plus and minus 4, and it's not. The square root of 16 is simply 4. If you don't believe it, graph it, see what you get. It won't say 4 and negative 4. Ask the calculator to type, just type in square root of 16, enter, and it'll just tell you 4. It's able to tell you when there's more than one answer. And it won't tell you more than one answer on that one. Okay. There's only one answer, and it's 4. So the key then is, if that's 4, how do we get two answers? Because it's an absolute value of x. All right, that gives me two things. X equals 4, x equals negative 4. Okay, now I want to go back to a definition. This is intense. I want you to find in here, where's your proof? Let's say that you thought the answer was no solution, and your teacher was saying, no, you can get an answer. The answers are 1 and 3. Well, of course, you could have proven it by sticking the numbers in. But you can also prove it by using math properties. Would you look through this math property and see where you can prove that that answer did not exist? I know these are dense, but you got to be able to handle reading this stuff. In college, you're going to learn a fair amount of your math from reading textbook stuff like this. Once you've found it, raise your hand. 5 people have found it. Find it. 6, 7, 8 people have found it now. There's another. There's another. I feel like we're in a tent revival. Yes, I see that hand. I see it. There's another. There's another. All right, thank you. Okay, so this is your part that proves if C, and by the way, they're referring to this little part of it right here where there's a C. If the C, or the answer to what the absolute value is equal to, if that is less than 0, that's negative, then C has no solution. All right. I like to learn by examples, and most math books don't just have these. They'll have examples then of the problems, and that's what I'm doing for you, is examples to show you how and why. All right. I want you to just do number 1 carefully, and I just want to remind you, it's already been, the clump is already alone, see? It's already been solved down to just an absolute value. From here, it's the part where you split it. Would you please even draw the 2 little lines like that to show me I'm going to get 2 equations? And write the 2 equations for this. And if you don't know how to do it, I'll show you in about 30 seconds. Once you've got 2 equations, they should look strikingly similar to each other. and you can solve them. Did you say 3x minus 1 equals 6 and 3x minus 1 equals negative 6? That's what you should have said. That came from the next rule up. It was this rule right here. Says that it'll be x equals c or x equals negative c. Okay? That's why we can do that. This is something that only came to me after teaching this for a long time as a way to help people see if their equations are right. This is usually where the equations get messed up. Usually people can get to this point, no problem. It's at this moment where people mess up. Would you just double check your equation and make sure that that and that are absolutely identical to each other? Except for one thing. The only thing that's different is that little negative sign. So the point is, if you can make sure that people have checked that their equations are identical to each other, then from there, it's just solving simple equations. I mean, anybody in this room you've made it this long, I know you can solve a two-step equation. So from there, I mean, not saying you couldn't make a mistake on it, but from there, add 1, get your answer and divide it by 3, and it's no big deal. Add 1, get your answer, no big deal. What did you get for your two answers, Jay? Oh, how dare you. 3x equals 7, x equals 7/3. Would you guys agree with that one? Okay, good. And the other one? Add 1 to both sides. Why don't you do this one for me?
Okay. What's it telling you what to do? Or like
I'll be your hand.
Okay. So you're going to add them on, and it's going to be 3x equals negative 5.
You are correct.
And you're going to divide by 3. So it's going to be x equals negative 5.
Perfect. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just say your math into the, like you just did? You can just say it instead of having to write it, and it would come out perfectly crisp and beautiful. I think at some day, I know there's such a thing as Dragon dictation, which can do kind of like that. But I don't think it's very good at being able to flow with like math equations and that kind of stuff. Dragon dictation is great for like dictating an essay. But anyway. All right. And even better, someday you'll be able to just think it, and your implant that's in your brain will communicate with your computer and will put what you're thinking on the paper. Yes? Yeah, they'll have to have commands like that. Like right now, if I tell my iPhone new paragraph, it doesn't type in new paragraph. It knows when I say new paragraph to automatically move down a notch and start a new paragraph. So yes, there's always going to be that problem then when you actually need to say new paragraph. Yeah, I got you. Oh, okay. That could be. That'd be a good way to get out of it. But then what if you have to say the word type? Yeah. Anyway. Have you guys seen those things where you can control things with just your brain? There are games out there now where you just move the ball from one side of the screen to the other with just your brain. Where you just think the ball to move left or right and it'll move. That's kind of scary to me. And they do have that now for pilots, because as a pilot you can't, like, everything's going so fast up there. When you're going thousands of miles an hour and you have to do things really fast, you just don't have the time to do all of the things you need to be able to do. You know, lock out targets onto that, and that. And, you know, now if you can get it to be just think it and it's true, they've got some kind of cool stuff now built into the helmets on the fighter planes, where it has cameras on the sides of the plane so that now effectively you can see through your plane. You can look down and you can see through your plane. It's like it makes your plane invisible, and it switches to the cameras mode. And so effectively it's like sitting in your plane, and just like your plane's made of glass and you can see through it, left, right, up, down, behind you. And you just have to look there and it'll go to the right cameras and show you what's there. And then for you, it's just like your plane is made of glass. Yes?
So then we can see no more need for like cockpit glass shields if you can see.
Wow. I think we're always going to want the fail-safe in case the electricity goes down. You know what I mean? You're going to want to be able to see what's going on. But it is a cool concept. You could be inside a flying box. You know, like you could be buried deep inside it and not even be able to see. That's possible. But we do have the backup windshields right now. But yes?
At that point,
Yeah, exactly. Why even be in the plane? Yeah, be just in a drone. That's a good point. And the other good part about that is you don't have to be able to handle the insane like G's that are involved. Like when it goes super fast up and like a normal person will pass out. The pilots are just trained to be able to handle it, and they have pressurized suits too, which help them keep the blood in their brain when that happens. Otherwise, the blood just drains away, and poof, they're out. They're going to pass out, and then plane can. Yeah. Anyway, we could go on and on about that kind of stuff. So let's go back to what if your life depended on this? Would you check it? Okay. Your life doesn't depend on it, but your grade will. But not right now. But if this was a test, I would absolutely check those answers. It might be even a bit of a pain because they're fractions, but I would test those answers because then you can know for sure whether or not they worked. All right, I would like to move to another kind because every other one on the page is just get the clump alone, easy peasy, just subtract 3 here, and then divide by -1, and that one ends up coming out with a negative at the end. So let's just look at that for 2 seconds. You get negative absolute value of x plus 5 equals -2. And then you might say, oh, wait, see, you said you can't have negatives. No, you can't just stop and say no solution here. Why not? Because there's a negative on the other one, so you have to divide by a negative or multiply by a negative. And either way, you come out with this, which can be done. And so don't just freak out every time you say it. You see an equals a negative. If there's a negative on the other side to counterbalance it, then it'll be fine. Yes? Oh, you can move it to the other side. I just kind of like having my absolute value on the left side. But you're right. You could have absolutely moved the absolute value to the other side by taking this, adding it to both sides, and it would effectively move over there. That'd be fine. Okay, so let's go on to number 5. That's the first one that gets weird. Everybody look at number 5. And now you got to be careful here. I told you to split these into 2, right? I bet you if I just have everybody do that, half you're going to do it wrong. Do it carefully. Try not to be that one who does it wrong. And now that I told you there's a trick to it, you'll probably be careful enough. Write the 2 equations you get for number 5. You don't have to solve them, just write them. I'll pause for a second. I'm going to have you compare with the kid next to you. All right, so I think you know by now that what I was looking for was this. X equals x squared minus 6. Notice I wrote it exactly the same as the original, except without the absolute values. Your first equation is super simple. You just copy what was there and take out the absolute values. The second one's more complicated. Some people get confused on which side gets negativized. The thing that was in the absolute value does not become the positive and negative. It's the thing that wasn't. Remember, the 6 is the thing that became plus 6 and minus 6. So it's this that has to become negative. But you can't just stick a negative in the front. You have to have a negative and then an absolute value, or sorry, then a parentheses, so that way the negative gets distributed to both parts. X equals negative x squared plus 6. All right, now we face this next part. Got a quadratic. I'd solve those again. If we could know one other function besides solving normal equations, please know how to solve quadratics. What's the first step? Try to do what? Try to factor it. So to try to factor it, if it doesn't factor, we'll have to go quadratic formula. But quadratics factor, like I'd say at least half of the time. And in our class, I bet it's 3/4 of the time. We're going to have your quadratics factor nicely. Because it just works out so much better. You don't have to have a calculator. You don't get weird answers that have radicals in them. So first we got to set it equal to 0 though. So I'm subtracting x from both sides. 0 equals x squared minus x minus 6. And on this one, minus x, 0 equals negative x squared. That's always a pain, and I'll show you how to fix it in a second. Minus x plus 6. This one right here, I want to zoom in on that for just a second. Stop factoring and look up. Take a look, look. I need all your eyes. I'm still missing like 8 eyeballs. Thank you. Keep it here now. How do I get this to not have that negative? Because it's like impossible to factor with that negative there. There's 2 options. You can factor out a -1, or even better, we can just get rid of all the negatives by doing what to both sides of my equation? I'm glad not many people know, because then I'm telling you something valuable here. If you ever want to change the lead coefficient, just multiply everything by -1. Now, people get weirded out by the -1 and the 0, but isn't 0 times -1 equal to 0? So I did do it to that side. It's just that it stays the same. And I multiply this by -1. And I multiply that by -1. And then I multiply that by -1. And now I can factor that. Much easier. Could you have factored a -1 out? Yeah. But either way, the answers are going to be the things in the parentheses anyways. So it wouldn't have mattered if you factored the -1 out, or you do what I just showed you. It'll factor either way. So you can factor this one. You're going to factor this one. You're going to get 4 answers. Would you please try to determine what your 4 answers are? It's just a little factoring practice now. Once again, something that if you're good at the top 20, you already got that factoring thing figured out. And if you're not good at the top 20, you see why I wanted you to be good at the top 20. Okay, Mr. DB in the back, tell me how you factored the one on the left. You are correct, sir. And the one on the right. Do you guys notice anything interesting about that? X minus 3 kind of goes with the x plus 3, right? And then the x plus 2 and the x minus 2 kind of go together. All right, so final answers. X equals 3, x equals -2, x equals -3, x equals +2. Oh, come on. Isn't any going to be, nobody's going to stop me? Shouldn't we check them because some of them aren't going to work? Hint, hint. Remember that whole thing about you get all the way to the end of the problem and then you're like, oh, I got my answers. But what if they don't work? Check them. Hint, hint, some of them don't work. You would assume, since we've done all this work to get there, that they must be right. But some of them, it's not like you did anything wrong. That's the other thing. People think, well, that means I must have did something wrong and I didn't do anything wrong. No. It's just that some of the answers that you do when you do this process aren't going to actually work. You put in the 3, it works. Let me show you putting in the -2. Let me show you it doesn't work. -2 goes in here. Shouldn't I get a +2 out for an answer? And then I put a -2 here. And what is 4 minus 6? -2. That's not the same as 2. Okay, so that didn't work. Cross it off. And then write EXT. That stands for extraneous. All right. You've learned pretty much everything you wanted to or needed to learn here. The only thing I haven't taught you is something on purpose I am leaving for you to try to figure out, and that's problems like number 16 and number 19. Of course, number 19 is just one step away from number 16. You'll just add absolute value of x plus 2 to both sides, and it'll look just like number 16. I mean, if you just rearrange this one right here, it's going to look just like that one. You'll have absolute values on both sides. What do you do? Well, if you read this, it'll tell you what to do. I need you to be able to learn something without me, with directions. Okay, so struggle through this. I'm going to cut out a bunch of problems. So that'll make this more reasonable that you can figure these out. You need to be able to be challenged with hard stuff. You took honors. You be willing to step up when there's some challenges like, hey, they think I can handle this. Let's see if I can prove that I can. All right, so let's get some ones that you should do and ones you shouldn't do. In this zone, all of these are so easy. I'm just going to have you start with number 5, and you can skip the others. Then go to this page. These are all different and unique and important, so I'd like you to do all 3 of them. On to this page. This is the one where I want you to try to learn from that statement up there, without me telling you how to get those answers. And you know how you'll be able to tell if it's right? Plug it in, check it. You'll know if you did it right or not. Okay. And 22 and 23, I am going to have you skip those because 26 has everything in it. and do 26, which is just a graph. And by the way, if you're like forgetting these, this is an absolute value graph, so it's a V shape that got moved 4 to the left, and what's that? Up 4, and then it got stretched. Oh, sorry, that's a down 4. My bad. Then this stretch is a what kind of stretch? Vertical stretch, 3 times as tall. And if you'd rather not do that, XY charts, as you learned in the top 20, can solve anything. You just have to be able to take an X, stick it in, like put in like a 4, or that's going to be big. How about a -4? Put in a -4. You can figure out what the other point is. It's a -4, so that's got to be on my graph. Just graph a few points, you'll see where the V is. Okay, and then don't forget, you got to remember all this stuff like increasing and decreasing intervals. You got tested on that in your last test. Those, remember, are not points. They are from here to here. It's increasing. They're X numbers. And absolute maxes and mins, that kind of stuff. All right, and then these are good for you also. Number 7 is very reasonable. We'll have already practiced things like number 8, so no need to do it again. That'll be in that previous problem. So skipping 8, but doing 7. Okay, I have found that if I make the assignments reasonable size and you do them, it makes a big difference. I did my part. I cut it down to reasonable size. You need to now get it done. All right, that's all I got for you for today.